Good morning. I am Dr. Erica Littlejohn. I was previously at NIH and I work with the NINDS team for strategic planning for health disparities. And we released the NINDS Social Determinants of Health Framework. And now I'm an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky in the Sanders Brown Center for Aging. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Yaffe. She is an internationally recognized expert in dementia epidemiology and one of the foremost leaders in identifying modifiable risk factor interventions for dementia. She is currently at the UCSF and she is an endowed chair as well as vice chair of psychiatry, neurology, and epidemiology. She won one of the VA's highest achievement awards for scientific research in 2022, called the Barnwell Award. She's received numerous awards, including the NIH's Lectureship Award for Outstanding Achievement and Impact in Epidemiology. And so here today, she's going to discuss with us the importance of understanding social determinants of health and dementia and ADRD health disparities. Dr. Yaffe.
Good morning. Let's see. Do I have to do anything to advance this? I do. Just next. There we go. Fantastic. All right, now I can focus on saying hello. It's my pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you to the organizers, Dr. Vigale and others. It's my first time at Charleston, so I'm really especially pleased. And this looks like a really fantastic gathering of like-minded people, and I'm looking forward to learning all from you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the disparities behind ADRD and what might be driving this. Again, this is not definitive. This is just a little peek. Let me see if I can do this for just a little bit, and I'll just stand here. Great. Okay, so we know there are disparities in Alzheimer's disease, and I'm going to use the word Alzheimer's disease, ADRD, dementia a little bit interchangeably, and we can talk a little bit about, whether there might be some differences in type of dementia, but I think in general, these things apply across the board. So I'm going to focus on these things today. How does dementia burden differ by race, ethnicity? What might be the impact of social determinants of health on this disparity? How do differences in cardiovascular disease, because I think this is something that we know the field of cardiovascular disease has big disparities, but how does that then interface with brain and not just stroke, but with dementia? And then what are the public health implications? So we know for sure that there are big disparities in both the prevalence, which is on your left, and on your right, the incidence of dementia. So on the left, this is work that the Alzheimer's Association puts out. They have a facts and figures, and which actually, if you're not aware of, it's quite good. It's quite comprehensive, and you can see that compared to white adults, African American and Hispanic adults have much greater prevalence of dementia. And this is again by age. So across all of the ages, you see this quite a big difference. And then on the right, this is work by my colleague Elizabeth Maeda, who did a really nice study with the Kaiser EHR data showing that there are very big differences. And in this case, they were able to look at 6 race ethnic groups, lowest among Asian Americans, and then white, and then Pacific Islanders, and then white, and then sort of a graded increase, again, across the ages. So we also undertook kind of a similar investigation using the EHR data from the VA. One of the things that's been a bit of a side project for me, but really I love working on the VA data. the for those of you who don't know, the VA they have the same EHR across the whole country since the late 90s. So can you imagine? So we have this incredible wealth of data. You have to have IRB, and you have to have certain you have to have a big data person, et cetera. But we've been really lucky to be able to use this data and understand national trends, for which there are very few EHRs that go across the whole country. So in this case, we look to see how again, for these 5 different race ethnic groups, how did the incidence differ for ADRD? And what we found was, again, similar to the Maeda and others, that in this case, the highest group was the Hispanic group, followed by Black, Asian, American Indian, Alaska Native, and then white was the reference. So I think we can show that they are these real disparities. The question for me and for all of us, I think, is, well, what is this? We don't think this is biology. What's driving this? And so, oops, somehow the title got away, but click to edit. Oh, well, I don't need the title. We thought, well, maybe it's partially regional. Maybe there are differences by region, and that some people, because they're more older folks, or maybe there are differences in their healthcare. So let's look at this regionally. And so again, with the VA, we did this study. And what we showed that, interestingly, there are differences in region in terms of incidence of dementia, with the lowest being in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, and the greatest being in what we call the stroke belt, which Dr. Howard will talk, I'm sure, a little bit more about, but who's led a lot of work with stroke in terms of the stroke belt. So this was really interesting. And then this remained, we actually adjusted for age, we adjusted for a number of different things, and it still remained. So then we looked to see, this is a map, obviously, of the US. And again, we saw the same differences in disparities by race ethnicity across these regions. So the incidence may differ by region, but we still saw the same gradient of disparities. So it's sort of interesting. We don't think it's just a regional difference. There's something else going on, and this was again work from the VA data. This was a study we did a long time ago, actually. I think people didn't even use the word disparity. It's ridiculous, but of course that's what it is. This was some work we did with a large prospective cohort, in which we tried to look at, again, the black-white differences in this case. This was a cohort of older adults, the composition was half black, half white, half women, half men. And what we found was, again, this sort of same, around about a 1.4 hazard ratio of difference comparing black to white. And we said, okay, this is back in the early 2010s. And we said, well, what's driving this? This just doesn't make sense. Let's try and understand this. So we did a series of analyses where we first adjusted for demographics and ApoE. For those of you who may or may not know, ApoE is very interesting in that it's the number one genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, and there are big differences in prevalence across race ethnic groups. And there are also some differences in association, the magnitude of the effect. So we thought, well, maybe it's ApoE. No, it was not. You can see that the hazard ratios don't budge at all when you put demographics in ApoE. And then we put in a bunch of comorbidities. Didn't budge at all. Then we put in lifestyle factors, physical activity, smoking, all kinds of things, barely budged. And then we put in SES, because we had pretty good measures of SES. And one could argue, maybe these are really more social determinants of health, but at the time we didn't use that term so much. And lo and behold, most of the association went away. So we were very excited about this, because we thought, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Whether this is, education level or financial inadequacy, family income, these are the things we had, literacy. So this was really, I thought, a very optimistic finding, because we thought, okay, maybe we can do something about this. I don't know why. I'm so sorry. The The headings are not here for some reason, but oh well. So this was some more work we did then with social determinants of health. In this case, we looked at the area deprivation index, which many of you know is a way to, it's a composite measure using your zip code and your where you're living to really try and get at a bunch of social determinants of health. Not everything, but they tend to track together, certainly around poverty and housing, education, et cetera. So it's Amy Kind has done some beautiful work in this area, but it's considered a pretty good way to study. Again, as a group, it's not an individual level; it's a group, but using ADI. And we found again this really nice graded relationship between ADI quintile and risk of dementia, which you can see. And again, we tried to adjust for everything we could, but it still was there, all these comorbidities, demographics, et cetera. And in this case, actually, we put in education and income individual level, and it was still there. And this is some more recent work we've done that's under review, where we're actually using social determinants of health, another composite, not the ADI, but actually a broader composite measure with a bunch of different things in it, both neighborhood and individual. So we're very excited about this composite measure because I think it's a little more thorough. And what we're finding, this is work from the cardio study, what we're finding is that, again, looking at these quartiles of social determinant of health index, that you can see that it's a little hard to see, but basically the solid line and the more the darker dash line, those are the lowest quintiles. So those people have less disadvantage, if you will, and then the other dots are greatest disadvantage. And you can see that on the top panels, those are three different tests of cognition. And you can see that over time, up to about 10 years, that those in the greatest disadvantage decline the most. They start off lower, but they also decline the most. The slope is different. And you can see, for example, in the middle panel, a lot of people get better, but those in the lowest actually decline a little bit. And then we looked at MRI, brain MRIs, and found that white matter hyperintensities, as well as the total gray matter volume, also tracked in a very similar way. So again, suggesting that social determinants of health are really, really important drivers, we think, of disparities when it comes to cognitive aging. So this is some hot off the press. Well, it's actually not on the press yet, but under review. Also, again with the Cardia study, what we did was we used that same composite social determinant of health index, and we said, okay, is there any difference in traditional AD biomarkers? So we were able to get Alzheimer's disease biomarkers, kind of state of the art assays. And what you see, they're not big differences, but keep in mind, this group of people, the mean age is about 60. So these are relatively young people in midlife. And we still see a difference by this social determinant of health index comparing the most disadvantaged to the least disadvantaged in AD biomarkers. And in this case, p-tau 217, which tracks very much with A beta, with amyloid in the brain, NFL, neurofilament light, sort of nonspecific, and A beta 4042. So we're very interested in these results. Again, another piece of evidence that social determinants of health are really driving some of the disparities in Alzheimer's disease. And again, we adjusted for a bunch of stuff. So I'd like to now turn to another thing that I think is important in terms of a driver, and that's cardiovascular risk factors. We know that cardiovascular risk factors, you all know what I'm talking about, hypertension, diabetes, dyslipidemia, obesity, et cetera. We know that they differ by race, ethnic group, and by sex. So they come with different cultures and diets and experiences, et cetera. And so this is some work done by my colleague at UCLA, Dr. Nyango, and he found that we can see these big differences in terms across race ethnic groups. We also found it, as I said, with sex. And so we thought, okay, well, maybe this is part of the picture. Maybe part of the difference is being driven by what people come in with. I showed you before we adjusted for comorbidities, and that didn't really move much, but this is actually a little more granular. So what we did in a study was we had done a pooled cohort across the life course, and we found that there, again, were these big differences in terms of race ethnicity. And what we wanted to see what happened if we adjusted for cardiovascular risk factors. And you can see that we were able to explain about 30% of the variance by adjusting for the cardiovascular risk factors. So we think that this is part of the story here. Obviously, cardiovascular risk factors are heavily entwined with social determinants of health as well. But it's sort of an interesting, other way to look at this. And again, this is some other work we did where we said, okay, this is with the VA data, how much of this is cardiovascular, how much is social determinants of health. We tried to do a bunch of modeling, and what we found was, again, a lot of this, probably about, this is the percent of the mediation of the difference. So you can see that, depends a little bit which group, but basically about a third of the variance, again, was explained by social determinants of health and cardiovascular risk factors. Again, I think this is very hopeful, because it tells me that if we can better care for cardiovascular risk factors and social determinants of health, I think it's a big lift, but we can do it, that we actually could decrease these disparities quite a bit. Huh, this is strange. I think this was my my this is weird. I don't know what happened, but anyway, I can tell you, because this is the end, so that's easy. It was supposed to list my grants and funding and thank you and next steps, but that's what we have all day for. But I do want to thank, I have a bunch of funding from the NIH and DOD and others, and very appreciative of that, of course, particularly during these times. And I think that's a really one of the things I want to say, to thank you all, because this is such a tricky time, to be in research, and we're all here to support one another. And I think we got to just keep at it. But meetings like this, I think, are really important, in terms of mentoring and colleagues and all sort of being together. So thank you. I'm looking forward to the day, and I'm sorry my slides somehow didn't make the ether transport, but I look forward to hearing from you.